All year long, we patiently wait in anticipation for the NBA playoffs to go down because that's when the lights are brightest and the most meaningful basketball is played. There are obviously teams going into the postseason this year with higher expectations than others, and objectively some teams are better than others, but that doesn't mean that they are a perfect team with no weaknesses, and that brings us to today's video. In today's video, and tomorrow's video, we'll be going through every NBA team that made the playoffs, except for the 8 seeds because the play-in tournament still has yet to decide it at this point in time, and we'll be identifying their biggest issue at the current moment. Obviously, the better teams may have smaller issues to deal with than the lower seeds, but no team is currently built to perfection. In this video, we'll be going through the teams in the Eastern Conference, and in tomorrow's video, we'll finish it up with the Western Conference playoff teams. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll go through each team in order by seed, so to start off we have the 1-seeded Milwaukee Bucks, and their biggest issue right now going into the playoffs is their half-court offense. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, when you're the top seed, it's going to be harder to find a glaring issue to talk about, and this isn't even an aspect of the game that they're bad at necessarily, but in the context of being compared to other playoff teams, they rank on the lower end. Overall, the Bucks were the 12th ranked team in the league in scoring from the half-court sets, which is above average. However, when you realize that 9 of the teams that ranked ahead of them are playoff teams, you then realize that the Bucks ranked 10th out of 16 compared to the other playoff teams, and that then becomes below average. The reason why this is notable is because in the playoffs, every game matters so much more, and every year we see the game slow down much more, forcing teams to have to rely more on their half-court sets because of how meaningful every possession becomes. So even though the Bucks are obviously one of the best teams in the league, this is one thing to keep an eye on as they progress through the playoffs. Next is the 2-seed Boston Celtics, and their biggest issue right now actually comes in the form of their locker room chemistry. For most of the season, the Celtics were cruising, sitting in the driver's seat of the Eastern Conference, but in the latter portion of the year, they started dropping games more frequently, the Bucks caught them and then passed them in the standings, and rumblings on the rumor mill have begun, which is never what you want to deal with going into a playoff run. Jaylen Brown has been vocal lately about his standing with the team, saying that he, quote, doesn't know if he even wants to stay in Boston long term, and he even called out some of the team's fans for their toxicity. The Celtics are a very well-balanced team, filled with capable creators on offense and swishable defenders on defense, but the team that tends to go all the way in the playoffs are the teams that are strongest in the locker room, and the Celtics right now just don't seem to be that team. Up next is the 3-seed Philadelphia 76ers, and their biggest issue going into the postseason is their bench production. The 76ers are one of the most top-heavy teams in the league because with Joel Embiid leading the way with MVP-esque production and James Harden orchestrating the offense at an elite level as the league's assist leader, the team overall actually ranked as the league's 3rd best offense this season, but the issue, as has been the case for years now, comes when Joel Embiid subs out of the game and the bench unit gets a spell. The Sixers rank in the bottom third of the league in bench scoring, and most notable of all is how hard the team drops off when Embiid subs out. With Embiid in the game, the Sixers outscore opponents by about 9.1 points per 100 possessions, and with him out of the game, they actually get outscored by a point per 100 possessions, which is a huge 10.1 point swing. You can look back at almost every prior postseason for the Sixers and see that they have had glaring issues holding on to leads when the bench subs in, and based on how they have performed this year, they may be in for a lot of the same. Next is the 4-seed Cleveland Cavaliers, and their biggest issue going into the playoffs is their wing depth. The Cavaliers are one of the sneakier contenders this season that seem to be flying under the radar, because they are solid almost completely across the board. In their backcourt, they have 2 dynamic shot creators and playmakers in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, and in their frontcourt, they have Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley anchoring the top-ranked defense in the league. But on the wing for them, there are a ton of question marks, with no straightforward answers. Karis LeVert is probably the most productive option offensively, but he's not naturally a small forward, and playing him alongside the rest would sacrifice their defensive capabilities. Isaac Okoro is the best defensive option, but really doesn't give you much offensively at all. Then guys like Dean Wade and Cedi Osman are also in the mix, but have glaring holes in their games that make the Cavaliers hesitant to trust them in big spurts. Next is the 5 seed New York Knicks, and their biggest issue is figuring out what to do with RJ Barrett. This one is going to sound like a weird one to choose, but when I was looking into the Knicks and what they were best at and where they struggle the most, I found RJ Barrett was unfortunately the most common denominator. The Knicks started to take major strides forward when they began to get 6th man Emmanuel Quickley and swingman Quentin Grimes more involved, and it's because the team is at their best with those two playing alongside Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle instead of RJ. When RJ is on the court, they score 4.9 fewer points per 100 possessions than when he's on the bench, and the team also allows 7.6 more points on defense in that span compared to when RJ is on the bench, which is a detrimental 12.5 point swing. Barrett is still the team's starter, but they may find that reducing his minutes would give them a better chance to advance. Next up is the 6 seed Brooklyn Nets, and their biggest issue going into the postseason is their lack of star power. In the NBA, arguably more so than any other professional league, star power tends to be the biggest driver of success in the postseason. We've seen teams make deep runs on the foundation of being well balanced with their lineups filled with above average talent, but they typically don't make the most noise compared to the teams with the top tier superstar talent. The Nets right now are a group filled with capable two-way players and average to above average shot creators, but nobody on their roster is an established all-star caliber talent. Mikal Bridges, I will say, has played like one since his arrival in Brooklyn, but playing at that level in 25 regular season games is much different than cementing yourself as such for an extended period of time, and he's about to learn the difficulties of what it's like to be schemed against by opposing defenses when you're the number one option compared to being the 4th option like he was in Phoenix. And finally, the last playoff team we'll be discussing today is the 7 seed Atlanta Hawks, because the play-in tournament still has yet to decide the 8 seed at the time of making this, but the Hawks' biggest issue going into the postseason is their spacing. The Hawks this year have felt like a disappointment because they brought in DeJounte Murray to pair with Trae Young in the backcourt, but it hasn't really elevated them, and in many ways it's actually hurt them. They sacrificed some of their best perimeter shooters in that move, and as a result, the Hawks now have in their rotation just 2 total players shooting above league average from deep. Bogdan Bogdanovic and Saddiq Bey are both shooting about 40% from 3 with the Hawks, but everybody else that gets minutes for them shoots below league average from 3, which is even more problematic when you realize Trae Young is included in that group, and he's supposed to be one of their best shooters. The lack of spacing has really made it hard for Trae and DeJounte to maximize their playmaking potential, and if they don't get that offense going, it's going to be a short series against Boston in round 1. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think these teams should be most concerned with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.